Hey everyone, I wanted to make like an answer key review session to go over homework or two, just in case you were wondering what some of the answers were for some of the homework for O2A and O2B. So I did put the scripts that I made up in GitHub, but I actually didn't actually answer homework O2A. I realized that when I made the homework O2A, the graph fails file, I wrote over the one that actually had them correct. So, and with the answers. So, I figured I'd just go through it and sort of correct it as we go. So I hope I remember what I did for these. So, graph 1, what error is being thrown? How do we correct it? Hint, the error message tells you. So I already ran the code chunks to get the graphs out, the sort of failed the graphs out. And what you can see is it says error mapping must be created with AES. Did you use a pipe instead of a plus? And that's exactly what we did here, right? So the problem with this one is you can pipe from the data, and again, ggplot, the first argument in it is data, so it is defaulting to say MPG is the data that's being used to plot here, and the mapping is created here. With this, the problem is that I didn't use a plus here. And once you do that, if you run it, it's going to actually print out a graph. So, oh, I actually made two mistakes in this. That's right. I also changed the x values. So if we look at MPG here, the other problem with this graph, besides using the pipe, is that the name of there is no city with a I. It's a city with just a ty. So now that we corrected that one as well, we're going to be able to get it to run fine. Hooray, we got a graph. So, kind of building off of that, why were the points blue? So the reason for that is a lot of people identified this, but the reason was sometimes off. Just to make it clear, the reason why is because it's set within AES, right? And AES is a static, so you can assign it to be a value that is in usually the database itself. Or you can assign it to be one thing, in this case blue. And basically, since it takes one value, it prints off the first color. If you ever notice that when ggplot has multiple colors, it will usually do red as the first one and then blue as the second one. Actually, going into MPG, we can, let's just graph it as class, just to kind of show usually the ordering, if there's not too many. Sometimes when you, oh, and now it's in parentheses again, and so it's actually just taking on the value of the quoted value there, class. But usually when you use ggplot, the normal sort of coloring defaults is that the first one's going to be red, and then if you only have two, it's going to be red and then blue, because those are pretty distinct, and then it fills in the colors kind of as you go there. So that's why I took on red, because just it's the first one. But so if we wanted to actually get the value to be the color, we want to put the color, use the color argument of geom point, and so we can say now we want the color to be blue, and then it will recycle everything. It doesn't print out, if you notice when it was AES, it also tried to print out a little thing saying, oh, these are all these values. It printed out a legend for the values so that it showed and said that the color was blue. But now when you have color and you're just using the argument color, it's actually just thinking, oh, what color should these points be? So we're writing it to be blue, and there's no legend for that, right? There's no like value that's being associated with. It understands what we're doing. So, right, great, we fixed that one. There's two mistakes in this one. The first is that the points want to be bolder, but alpha f2 does nothing. So what alpha does is it's a value that you can set between 0 and 1, and it's the way that you can actually view data when they're like right on top of each other, and also how you can sort of start thinking about doing layers, if you wanted to do it that way as well. It would just kind of change the aesthetic. You can kind of see what it does. It just makes the values fainter, but if there's values that are right on top of each other, they will pile on top of each other so you can see them darker. Usually doesn't work very well with a class, a color aesthetic, but it works well if you're just plotting like black points, where you can see it gets, the more data that's there, the bolder it gets. But if you wanted to do, to change this so that it's actually bigger, we want to make, we want to do size, and now I can make it 1.2, for example, and they're going to be slightly bigger points, because bolder in this case will just make it slightly bigger. So maybe that didn't do a good job of showing that it was actually bigger, so let's just do something ridiculous like a size of 5 should be rather large. Sorry, it's taking a little while to run. Again, I apologize for the computer. Look at that. It looks like something someone created in MS Paint. So that's going to be distracting, so let's put to 1.5. And the other thing that I mentioned was I want the legend position to appear, but I want it to appear right here. And right now it doesn't do that. It doesn't appear at 540. The reason for this is also a value that takes a value of 0 to 1. It's a sort of a percentage instead. So what I want, and this kind of works well because you can actually play with the graph then, and it will always appear in that sort of position of it. It doesn't need to know what values are in the x-axis, which is why it works this way. So I want it to be in the x-axis. I want it to be, well, around 5, which is halfway, a little bit more than halfway. So let's say 0.6, 60% through the graph, and I want it to be at 40, which is, well, let's just say 80% up, ggplot, and wait for it to print out the graph, and look at that, you get it right on top of it now. So, quite nice. If I wanted to remove the legend title class, you know, I could rename it or redo it. You can just say theme, and with theme you can also give more arguments, and you can always hit enter to do it, but it's going to be legend title equals, should be null. Eventually it will run and show me if I'm right or not. So if I didn't want the legend title, I would do element blank. It's sort of a random one, you just kind of have to remember that. So hit the enter, and now you can see the class is gone. And finally, if I wanted to remove it completely, well, you actually saw that I was able to, if you put the position to be, you know, C's at 40 and 40, it will never appear because it's all the way off at wherever 40 is. But that's probably not the best way to write the graph, and it's just going to confuse people if you do that. So what you just want to put in for the legend position is none. Again, some of the ggplot things are kind of weird, right? Like that was none, one of them was element blank, and there are explanations that could be had for all of them, but maybe that would help you remember them, but often they're ones that you might just need to look up, especially if you don't not graphing that often or not having to deal with legends. So, all right, graph number 4. I just wanted one smoothing line, but there's 3. The reason why is because the color is being given the aesthetic here in ggplot, and if remember, this mapping gets applied to all of the functions that are later. So if I also wanted to put something else, like a different function, for like a different geom on here, color would also be given by drive. So that's not, you know, what we want in this case, because we wanted one smoothing line, but we do want the color there. So we have to remove the AES from there, and I need to give another parentheses so that it will actually run. And I need to put the AES here, and this time I can just color is equal to the drive, or then geom smooth doesn't need any further arguments or anything, so let's go here and run it, and you'll see that you get that one smoothing line instead. You can also change the color if you wanted to of the line, because the default is blue for whatever reason, and so maybe it would look better with a black line, because then you can show that it's not related to any of the points. And there we go. So good, we were able to change that one. Again, this was important. I saw a lot of people kind of say not quite the correct thing in their explanation of it, but it's that there's this idea of inheritance, and it's kind of important when you start stacking geoms on top of each other, which, you know, ends up happening in the mimic file, but also happens if you're making complicated graphs. Cool graphs are hard to make. That is to say, you need to be really considerate of what mapping is going to be consistent with all the geoms, and which one is not going to be consistent. So, and you can see what happened here is that you turned it 45 degrees, but then you get it start overlapping with the bottom of the axis. Why is that? So you can see that element text is able to set to 45. If I wanted to, I could do 90, and you'll see that it actually puts it on the side. There's a lot of data that it's plotting, and my computer's slow. And it actually looks pretty fine, but you can see that it's also kind of weirdly justified. So the reason for this is because it always centers the middle of the label. That is ggplot's default interaction. So if I wanted to go on an angle again, what I want to do is I want to say, yes, angle at 45 degrees, but adjust where that sort of default level is. So I need to adjust the horizontal position of what, right? So I want the end of the, and this is also one of those that is a 0 to 1. It's a sort of percentage. And so I want, go to the 95% place of the text and put that as the center, or the value that goes right underneath it. So I'm going to do 0.95. 1 would be fine. Though I like it actually because it makes it a little bit closer. If you do 1, they'll be slightly further away from the tick marks, just because you can see, like with Rover, the R isn't quite aligned here, and the N kind of goes over, but that puts it a little bit closer to me, which I like. It puts it so the N is at that angle, so it's a little bit closer. So you can see that it was able to fix it with HJust. So if I wanted to go back to angle of 90, if I do low HJust, you can see that it's actually going to adjust it. Instead of it being on the center, it's going to be towards the bottom of the screen, or towards the bottom of it. So it's adjusted kind of like left justified, but it's, angled 90 degrees, so it's still justified this way. And so what we will have to do is go towards and move that up, probably be a nicer aesthetic to make it so that it would be HJust like this. What's going to happen though, and again, it's horizontal justification, but you rotate it in 90 degrees, so now it's slightly different of what you would expect. You kind of have to tilt your head and be like, oh, that's a horizontal justification. You can actually also see that it's a little bit off, so I want to actually adjust the VJust as well. I might play around with this, so there might be a cut to where, and there indeed was a cut, so I adjusted it to 0.4, so that again is changing the height value. So I wanted to go basically 0.4 the way, go 0.4 from the bottom. If I do a VJust of 0, it'll go and kind of align so that it's further to the left. So again, off. So sometimes you just have to play with the values to see what value you end up liking. And if your computer is faster than mine, it doesn't take forever like mine does. So let's go over to the Mimic, and I ran all of these as well. So this is how you make the graph. So here's the graph and everything. Some of the things to note about it. So we made a bar graph. The bar graph is bar automatically counts, and actually made a video recently going over geom_call. If you have a y value that you want to specify and use bars to also make it, that would be a geom_call. So you can see the other video about going over factors if you want to see an example of that. But in this case, we just wanted to count the number of diamonds, basically, in each of these categories. So using fill is equal to clarity, which you can see it does there. Cut is equal to X, which is going to be this fair, good, very good, premium, or ideal cut, what type of cut the diamond gets. And here position is going to be equal to dodge, because if you didn't have this, this is going to take forever to run. But if you didn't have position equal to dodge, what will happen is that it would count and it would just stack right on top of each other. But we don't want it, you know, maybe you can. I don't particularly ever like viewing these graphs like that. And you can see that the text is going to be off. You'd have to adjust where these values are now. But I like that you can make the position equal to dodge to show one side by side under the same like categorical value. You also might be asking why these colors are the fill is equal to clarity, and why they don't just form a color like it's actually a gradient. If you notice, it's a red. It's not red, orange, yellow, blue like how it was when I mentioned that the default for coloring is this typically. The reason for that is actually because if you were to look at the fill and clarity, so clarity is actually a factor, so this actually goes back into the other video that I'm making about factors. But if we do class to see what kind of class data type it is, diamonds, clarity, so it's taking that vector, it's going to print out what class it is, and it's an ordered factor. And since it's ordered, it knows that it should be more of a gradation when you fill it in the colors. So nice little tidbit about an ordered factor and why they can be useful. If you haven't looked at the other factor video, I mentioned that, and I mentioned that it's sometimes useful. This is actually a good example of when sort of some interpretation when it is. But you can see then labs actually, so you can do X lab label, Y label, and title, and then everyone set that up, but labs is probably the best one to do that. It took me a couple months of using ggplot to realize that I could just specify all the labels with labs. So if you didn't see that, that's something nice. You can add a subtitle, and if you're wondering about having an extra line here, that's what this is doing. So this is going over because I'm using RStudio with an R markdown, and you can see this is line 52 still, so it's actually written as one line. But what we see here is that I use this -n, and again, I mentioned this in the factor video as well, but there is some interpretation that goes on when you have sort of a character vector, and this -n or \n means new line. If I wanted a tab instead, you can do the \tab, and that is actually useful for reading in data sometimes. So if you go and do read delim, you can see the sep here is equal to, it assumes that it's a tab separated file, which is most text files are tab ones, compared to a CSV, which is comma separated, where you'd want to have a comma. Or just do read CSV. So, fun facts as always. So the next thing I wanted to mention was that you were able to annotate graphs by using the the ggplot function annotate. In this case, I wanted a text annotation where I'm going to put in some text. The label of that is my best diamonds, of course, and you see how I actually have it justified. It's a little bit different. It would be less justified if I wanted to, but that's why I was saying where I can insert some tabs here. So I have N to say I want it on a new line, and then of course is tabbed over twice. The X value for this is something you have to specify. I mentioned before, with one of the things that you can specify as a percentage with the annotate. You're adding something to the graph and it needs to know the actual literal position of that you're going to put it on. In this case, x is equal to 4. X is equal to 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's actually a premium, and y is equal to 4,500, and it puts it and centers it right there. So very nice. Geomannotate is very similar. In this case, though, I'm putting a rectangle, and for a rectangle, you need to put 4 coordinates in: an x min, x max, y min, y max, and there you can see how you do it. And this is where the alpha function comes back in, because if I had this at 1, it'd probably be too dark, so I wanted to be lighter so that you can see the data actually, and it's in the background where I'm highlighting it as if I'm talking about this area in particular. The last thing, of course, is for most of my graphs I use this. Theme plot title is equal to element text, HS is equal to 0.5. I mentioned this before, that it's adjusting like the position of it, and so it's adjusting it along where the graph is, 0.5, so it's centered justified basically, is what that all entails. So very nice. Went through a lot of different things. This one I'm graphing the iris. In this case, the data set is that I'm using iris. I'm mapping sepal length versus petal length, and as I can see here, I didn't actually I need to change the labels of this one because I thought, it actually was labeled fairly well with the dot though, so if I wanted to, I could actually change that. I'm doing a geom point, obviously, from the fact that they're points, except that pretty much everything that I'm changing is species, so I want it to be color species and shape to be species. And again, this goes back to factors, talking about factors. So I want to do facet wrap in this case. There's also facet grid if you want to specify a grid of values, but that's better when you have multiple values that you're faceting by. So for example, if I wanted to facet, there's a good example with the cars dataset. If I wanted to facet cars by both drive and number of cylinders, because there's only a certain number of values of each, you'd actually get a grid where there's like, here's the values plotted that are 2 cylinders and like forward drive, and 2 cylinders and reverse drive would be in a separate grid. I should probably have just graphed it to show you an example of it, but if you're interested, I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find some good examples. This time I'm doing facets, and this tilde, you'll find out if you use it in different things, it kind of means by. In this case, you can kind of see that geom smooth, it's y like approximated by x, so it's basically a linear formula where y is being predicted by x. That's how I interpret it, like read it sometimes in my head. So I want to facet, and facets create multiple plots, and what do I want to do it by? I wanted to do it by the species, but if you notice, my species list was in a different order, and it wasn't in alphabetical order, which is the normal way ggplot works, because that is, alphabetical is the way factors are assigned. Again, you can see the other video about factors. In this case, though, I want to assign factors to species. You could edit the data frame. So if I wanted to do it a different way, I could edit the data frame and assign, make a new column where I have the species as a factor. So something would be like iris, and maybe I want to say graph species, because it's the species values that I'm doing for the graph. And I'm assigning it to be a factor, and then x is a vector that you're assigning to be a factor, which is going to be this iris species is the vector that I want to reassign, and the levels are equal to these values. And the levels are just the order in which I wanted it to graph, essentially. So if I wanted it to be in this one first instead and this one last, you just swap their positions in the level argument. And for this one, you only need to say what values are unique. So if you ever want to look at what values you would have to assign for this, if you just do unique, I suppose I will finish this off and just copy that up. There's not really a good way of assigning it in this instance where it's in this particular order. There could be other ways if it was reverse alphabetical order, for example. But now I could just, instead of saying facets by, if I change this iris to, I could just say facets by graph species. If I wanted to make sure I had the factors in there already. There's no necessarily benefit for doing it this way versus the other way. It kind of depends if you want this change to be permanent to the iris dataset or not. You could also rewrite over the species data so that it is a factor. But if you're ever looking for what values there are, you could just do unique, and let's just do species, and you can see that there's 3, and the levels, it is actually a factor already, but the order is in alphabetical order because that's just the default order for factors typically. In this case, it was because the data iris was stored in such a way that it saved species as a factor versus a character. Again, if you're interested in factors more, you can see the video I posted about that. So if I run this, you can see that it should be the same graph that you were trying to make. Again, there's no benefit or not. The thing here is that you can see that the x-axis is the same for all of these, sepal length, but petal length varies. Here it starts from 1 and goes up to 2 basically, and you can see there's a difference. That's just to say that you can set the scales free, and you can set them just free, or you can set them free for a particular just the y or just the x axis. So it is a little bit misleading then to show this data because it looks like these have very similar petal lengths because they visually are in the same, have a kind of similar spread, but obviously they're very different, and this is much more compact than this one or this one. And then obviously GM Smooth, I did a linear model because it's a facet, and it doesn't matter where this is, it will make a linear model on all of them. There's not a way, obviously, where I showed in the graph fails where I wanted this one to have one linear model. There's not obviously a way to have one linear model if you're going to have multiple graphs with a facet. But you can also see that I changed the method here to be linear, actually. You might, if you didn't change the method to be linear, you potentially would have gotten a graph. Let's check it out. Let's delete that. You probably got a graph that was similar because it looks like the data is pretty linear, correlates pretty well. Actually, you wouldn't have because of this, which is quite funny to me. But you can see that there you just set the method to LM, and there's actually other methods as well. If you wanted to be a different type of curve, you can look at all the different ones. If you wanted to be like a parabola or something else. Alright, so graph 3. Graph 3 was actually quite a tricky one, and I'm kind of interested to see how other people, variations on this, because there's a couple ways to make this work. The way that I mentioned is that it's really nice to have the subset, this data set subsetted so that you actually only have the Corvette information here, because that'll allow you to add the labels a little bit easier because you only are making the labels for those values. And then also ggRepel, like I said, are useful for making text annotations, so these are in particular really needed for the text annotations, but you can actually do some of the other values differently. So what I did for this was take the MPG and I piped it in. Otherwise I could have just said ggplot data is equal to MPG, because generally the data is equal to MPG, but not for all of this, as you'll see. So I made the geom point, and I did a sort of interesting thing here is I set color is equal to class and put equals to two-seaters. And what this means is essentially you can read this as color is equal to class if it's equal to two-seater, or really it's equal to, it asks this question first, class is equal to two-seater, true or false. Now, two-seater ends up highlighting the Corvettes. I could have also done probably the better one to do, because it would have been to say model is equal to Corvette, if I know how to spell Corvette correctly. And then if I run this, you'll see that it's actually the exact same thing, because it's pulling out the same values, taking the model where it's equal to Corvette, it's reassigning this to be true or false, and basically true becomes one color, false becomes another color. And it actually is interesting that false, because it goes alphabetically, I've mentioned factors before, kind of alphabetically normally. Since false is first, that's what you specify here, values, when I want to color them. So I wanted the non-Corvettes to be black, and so I specified that first, and then the true values from here, or that is the values where the points are blue, or the values that are corresponding to Corvettes to be blue. But you can also do this with pulling out the data as well, and I'll go over that in a second. But to finish up the example that I have, the next thing I did was the geom text repel, and this is again from the ggRepel, and it's a very useful way of doing this, and it's actually a really nice, a lot nicer, because it makes these little lines if it's needed, which is a pain to do in base ggplot, but can be done if you really wanted to do it yourself, but they already have a package for it, so I don't know why you would do it yourself. The other ggplot one that I've used quite a lot is ggpubr. So if you wanted to have like p-values on there, there's ways of printing out the p-values, as you can see with like annotate, but ggpubr has some good defaults for being able to graph, like to show a comparison between two groups. So let's say you had two groups and you did a t-test between them, and you want to put stars above them. ggpubr is a kind of a nice way of doing that, and I'll let you look into that if you would like. Sometimes some of the defaults are really annoying, and it can be even more annoying if you want to change some of them. For example, the tests that you're doing. So it's not maybe the best if you're going to do certain unusual tests, like if you're not going to do a t-test, for example, though you can specify the tests to a degree. Alright, so like I said, geom text repel, data is equal to Corvettes. Basically, I only wanted to graph the information on the Corvettes, and while you could potentially try to do this by subsetting it in here, it's just going to be easier to make this. I mean, you could potentially say data is equal to this, and then mapping is this, but it's just easier to kind of say, I'm just have the subset of Corvettes that are that is this data set, so it's only those 5 observations, and I just want labels for those 5. and mapping, you don't actually have to specify X and Y because that is actually true globally, and it's true here too. The data rewrites the data though, so it's no longer is the data going to be MPG, but the AES X value is still going to be displacement, and Y is still going to be highway. But I'm also going to add this other value, label. Label is because the geom text needs a label. You basically just are telling that it's the text value, but you're not saying what those values, what it should read, and so label does that. And then I made your life difficult because I also wanted to show off the paste function. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the year for each value here. So in this case, it happens to be that they're all Corvettes. If I wanted to do this for every single dot here, obviously I would have to change the Corvette here, but I'm pasting, and I'll do that after this actually, to show you how you would do it. You're taking Corvette, and I want to paste the year. So this is actually coming from the MPG. Actually, it's coming from the Corvette dataset in particular, but MPG and Corvette are the same datasets, so they have the same. Well, they have the same columns. They just have, this is just subset of this. So they have the year here. So it's take Corvette and paste in the corresponding year of that car, separate it with, well, nothing in this case, because I have it actually have a comma and a space here already. So I don't need it to separate with anything. I could, if I wanted to, just say paste Corvette and have a comma here, and that's what I'll show you in a second. I also wanted to nudge x 0.3. If you set the seed to for a number, so there's a little bit of randomness, and setting a seed sort of standardizes it. So you probably had a similar output to this, except if you didn't use the nudge x is equal to 0.3, and so basically that shifted it off to the right. The reason for that is because these values are off to the right, and I wanted to just, there's a lot of open space over here. If I just did it completely randomly, it could be that the Corvettes will actually, you can see where the Corvettes would be. It would be 0.3 spaces kind of over to the left. And I was like, well, there's more space over here, so just move over there. Theme, legend position equal to none. So again, that comes up because I didn't want to have that coloring scheme there. I wanted to put the title. And then if you didn't notice, I actually changed the scale of this graph. So I actually wanted to include, I went to 0 and up to 8, just to show how you do it. You set the limits of C1 to 8. Basically, that's the minimum and the maximum, because you're on scale X continuously, so you have to think about it as the min and max. If you wanted to change the Y, you would say scale Y continuously, and then you do the min and max with the limits as well. But if you also notice that if you were to just do this, I think the breaks are kind of odd looking, so I want it to be basically breaks, or where the tick marks are. You have 1 to 8, so I wanted it to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I mentioned showing you the data if you wanted to put text annotations on all of this, so this is going to get real messy. But if I wanted to include the model and the year for all of them, so I'm going to get rid of data is equal to Corvette, so that means the data is now going to be MPG, including everything. The mapping I still need to do because I need to create the label, and I'm going to paste, in this case, just the model. The model is, again, the column here, and this is going to be such a mess. And the year, now this is going to paste it directly next to each other, so if I want it to be a comma and a space, I would put the sep is equal to comma and the space. And I probably can get rid of the nudge as equal to 0.3 now, because the value is going to be all over the place. So if I run this, it's going to take a long time because it has to print out all the text as well, and my computer's slow, like I mentioned several times already. And There you go. You can see that it's printing out all of it. You can see kind of some of the text here. Altima 2008, a Camry here. You know, just a mess if you just tried to do model year. So it's nice to have that subset already to be Corvette, and using a different data set to do it. It's really the easiest way to do it. I'm not even going to try to do it in any different way. You could do, and I can actually leave model here because that'll still work. It's just going to print Corvette. The thing that you could do differently if you wanted to is the geom point. I just kind of want to mention this because it goes in order that you give it for geom point at least. So I mentioned like facet and having where you have the facet versus where you have the linear line regression doesn't matter, but if you wanted to since I already have the Corvettes separated in their own little box and bin, I can say the data, and this data again is MPG, so I want all of these colors to be black. So I'm just going to set that, and I'm not going to set it in the aesthetic because I know, as you know, that sets the values. I want all of them to just be black. So then I can do geom point, and I want to point now the Corvette values. So let me be explicit and say that the data is equal to Corvette, and AES is fine because it's going to get those inheritance. I want to be the same on the same page with displacement and highway, but this time I'm going to set the color is equal to blue. And in this case, I don't need scale color manual because I just set them to be. And what this is going to do is it's going to plot geom point black, and then it's going to plot the blue on top of it, which is slightly important because if you did it the other way, obviously the point would just appear black. So now I can do this and get rid of the mess that graph was, and you see that I get the same values. I got rid of the nudge by 0.3, so you can see what's happening here. You can also see that the Corvette, since it wasn't capitalized before, it's now lowercase because it's just the model. If I really wanted to, I could also mess with the model by saying, by using some other, by doing some manipulation to uppercase that. So there's things like to upper, which should work to so you can see where it was lowercase, and if you use to upper, it actually capitalizes every single letter in there. There's actually there's multiple ways of doing this again. You can do it in base R, but actually there's the string R package, which is also part of the tidyverse, and it's str, which is the string, and I want to make it to title or to sentence, doesn't really matter. Basically, to sentence will make it so that only the first, if there was multiple words, to title would make it so that every single word would be capitalized. There's only one word in the model, so it doesn't really matter. So now if I print this out, it'll look exactly the same. So once you get into some of these other things, you'll see that you can get a lot of variation where you end up getting the same thing out. But kind of subsetting can be useful. If you were going to just plot this, if you just wanted to have the colors be different, the other way to do this would actually be to potentially use dplyr. Dplyr works better if you're going to be doing pipes. There's other ways of doing this, but it would be to make a column to say what the color you want it to be. So in this case, I want a column that's like maybe where the name is Corvette color, and I want that to be equal to, well, basically I want it to be a logical vector, or a number or whatever it is, but a logical vector will be the easiest. So let's say I want it to be equal to the answer to this question. Is model equal to Corvette? I'm not going to pipe it in. Oh, I forgot the y in dplyr. So I'm not going to pipe it into the ggplot. This is actually just going to print out the results of the graph, or the results of the table, and you can see I get this column name that is Corvette color. Most of it's false, but if you get to the two-seater Corvettes, which don't display on the same thing, but here are the Corvettes, so you can see that they are truly Corvettes. You could also do geom point and just using one value and say color is equal to, it's an aesthetic where color is equal to the Corvette color, and then do scale color continuously. But that would be another way to do it. But you can see it kind of asks the same question that I used in my example, without having to do make the column itself. So, all right, yep. Paste. Paste is very useful. I'll show you examples of how to do it with file names and parts of URLs together. So for example, if you had to download multiple files and the URLs are very similar, but you have to say like, oh, one of them, so I'm a cancer person, and so sometimes I download data from the TCGA, and so sometimes the data is the exact same that I want, but I want the breast cancer data set, and then I want like the prostate cancer data set. So I just need to paste all the same parts together, and then one of them put prostate cancer, and then one of them put breast cancer, and then I'll be able to get the files, which doesn't sound that useful if you're doing two, but I sometimes downloaded the entire TCGA, so RNA-seq data, so it gets useful when there's like 20 different files that you're downloading that are very similar. So this one I just wanted to mention because you can show the color blind. So this is, nothing to correct there or anything, and you can set whatever sets you want to make it. And this is the sort of solution for this one to talk how it does. I'm also still using the MPG dataset. The mapping is going to be class versus city, and X versus Y. And the solution to this, a lot of people came up with, there's some people I talked to that use geom point and then use the jitter function in there to say that they wanted to jitter it within that. But the easier way to do it is actually there is a geom jitter, and the reason why that this is a little bit easier is because you can set the height is equal to 0. So you notice on this graph, if you were to just jitter it, you probably notice that you got data that looked differently. And you can kind of see that this take on just integer values pretty much on this graph, so there's like sort of alignments here. If you were to jitter everything, it would start moving the X position and the Y position, which in this case, the sort of moving on the y-axis is fine because the SUV is here on the y-axis. So it doesn't really matter. It's all over SUV. But in the x-axis, it's numeric. You don't really want to jitter it in that direction. So you can just say, I want it to move, but only in that direction if you set the height is equal to 0. Why the height is equal to 0 and not like the width equal to 0? Well, in this case, even though the height, obviously you can see, is stacked on top of each other and everything, or like vertically in a row, it's because we use the chord flip. So even though we use chord flip, we still have to say the height here, because this one, if you were to just graph it this way, without this data, without the rest of this data, that is, you can see that it's now actually talking about the height is equal to 0. That is, I don't want anything moving on the y-axis because these are values that are definite and really should be where they are. But I want it to jitter on the x-axis, or yes, I wanted to jitter on the height, but not the width in this case. So fun thing there. And then I wanted to do geom box plot. If you want to know how to get rid of the fill is equal to NA. Simple as that. You'll be able to see it. Outline shape is equal to outlier shape is equal to NA. So the reason for this is because I'm already plotting the values. If you were to not have this, you'd have, for those who don't know what a box plot is, or like generally, a box plot shows the median and the interquartile range, and then it extends to the range of the data set typically after that, except when there's outliers. So sometimes it's also like the 95% confidence interval, and then if there's any outliers, you can clearly see them marked. Now, if I didn't say outlier was equal to NA, then the values would be, you see these black values here, and then you would also start thinking, oh, there's two values out here, when there's really just that one value. And also it's black where I have the nicely color-coded in the points, so want to make sure that that's changed. So outlier shape is equal to NA. But theme, chord flip, I mentioned that already, so that's why how you're getting the box plots horizontally instead of vertically. This is the only way to do that. Theme classic, so this actually is probably something that I was messing around with. So theme classic is, the white background. Scale color brewer palette is equal to set 2. So color brewer is a way to scale. So you probably saw that you could scale color discrete, and then you can give the values yourself. You can scale color continuous. So you can say, like, you can kind of make a gradient of blues. You can make a gradient of red. If you want to do any of the color brewer values, which are what we were just showing here, was our color brewer. ggplot already has this sort of installed in looking at this, so that's why you're able to just say, I want set 2, and it knows what you're meaning, because that is, like I said, already part of already loaded when you load ggplot. So then the last thing was just to change the label titles, and so if I hit that play again, you'll be able to see everything there. So a lot of tricks there, probably a lot of Googling for everyone there, so my apologies in a way for that. Part of graphing with ggplot is just Googling things, but these were, hopefully you saw that a lot of these graphs there was a lot of thought put into making it so that you can see a lot of different things about how you can, you can really customize things pretty much in every way, and that there's really certain important aspects that you can consider in doing it. So I wanted to kind of touch on most everything that I find useful, and there's probably other things that I sort of forgot about, but you'll reach that when you reach that. Hope you guys are well. I'll see you in the next video.